Chapter 2, Stigma. Talking about the elephant in the room. Removing stigma from mental health in general society is an important goal for everyone. In policing, it is a goal that must be recognized and acted upon as an urgent priority. Ontario Coroner's Expert Panel on Police Officer Deaths by Suicide, 2019. "If you ever say that to me again, I'm walking out of here and never coming back," I said. I meant every word of it. I was not ready to hear what I had just been told. I was not willing to hear that. Who was I yelling at? My psychologist. Why? Because he had just told me that I had PTSD. In an instant, I went from feeling like I could do anything to feeling like I couldn't do a single thing. I felt broken and dejected. I felt afraid. So he went through a list of symptoms from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, which is what mental health professionals use to diagnose mental health conditions such as PTSD. He repeated many of the symptoms I had been describing to him, and he explained that they were consistent with a PTSD diagnosis. He asked, "So how long have these symptoms lasted?" It wasn't days, weeks, or months. It was years. He told me that if those kinds of symptoms persist beyond a few months, then they would meet the criteria for a PTSD diagnosis. Logically, I understood what he was saying. I knew that I would be saying the same thing if I was in his shoes, but I still wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't thinking logically about it. I was having an emotional reaction to what he was saying. I desperately wanted him to be wrong. I resisted him even when it was in my best interest to take his advice. I wasn't willing to try the treatment he was recommending. He said EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, had proven a highly effective treatment for people in my position, but I wouldn't even listen to him about it. I wasn't thinking rationally. I was having a deeply emotional reaction. I was still stuck in denial about the reality of my situation. It felt unimaginable to climb out of this dark hole that I was in, a hole that I could barely even recognize that I was in. Institutional stigma. I met with a representative from my union. He told me that if anyone ever knew about my PTSD diagnosis, I would be immediately removed from the emergency response team, ERT, and I would never be allowed back. My ERT career, and possibly my policing career, would be done forever. I was terrified that this would happen to me. I was very proud to be a police officer. I was also proud to have earned a position on the ERT team. They were important parts of my identity. I was worried that it would be taken away from me because of something that I felt helpless to control. This was the old way of dealing with mental health problems. Treat it like a garbage can that was overflowing. Just try to keep cramming more garbage into the can without actually dealing with the problem inside. Hope that you can keep it from overflowing by hiding the problem. It is exactly the opposite of what we should do, but this was a common reaction from officers at the time. Self-stigma. I carried a lot of internalized shame regarding my PTSD diagnosis in the form of self-stigma. I had heard of another officer in a different jurisdiction who was removed from the ERT team after being diagnosed with PTSD. I was worried that the same thing would happen to me. I also thought that some of my friends on the team would no longer trust me to be capable of having their backs in a dangerous situation. Their trust meant the world to me. I knew that trust was hard to earn and easy to lose. I was still working full-time, but I knew that I wasn't in a good mental state. I'd recently had my first panic attack. I had another one the following day. I was still working for several weeks after, as I refused to accept that I wasn't mentally ready to do my job. I was dealing with an accumulation of nearly a decade of traumatic calls at work that I had never properly dealt with. I was also affected by the recent suicide of my godfather, Bill. I was stuck with the memory of hearing his wife, Janet, tell me that she had called out for me to help when she had found Bill after his suicide, but I wasn't there to help her. Logically, I knew that I hadn't done anything wrong when I wasn't there for Janet, but that didn't matter, as I still felt tremendous guilt about it. I was going through a breakup in a relationship. I I had work stress that had been accumulating from working way too much overtime. I was getting burnt out. I remember one month where I worked about 90 hours per week, every week. I didn't have a day off for a month. Like many police teams, we struggled to find enough officers for calls, so I would answer call-outs on my days off. That's great for the paycheck, but it was terrible for my life, my health, and my long-term well-being. I had recently experienced my second suicide by cop attempt, when a young man, barely out of high school, had pulled an imitation firearm in front of me. I felt like a failure because I should have shot him, but I didn't. I felt ashamed because people could have been killed due to my inaction. Even as the people around me were starting to see that I was not in a healthy place, I continued to work. I wasn't willing to be perceived as needing help. I wasn't willing to be perceived as weak. I talked to my boss and I suggested that I take 2 weeks off using my vacation time. I planned to use that time to get control of myself without being on stress leave. At the end of the 2 weeks of vacation leave, I could tell that my symptoms were still not under control. I still couldn't sleep. I couldn't control the anxiety that I felt. I talked to my supervisor and I decided that I was going to need more time to deal with my challenges. That sounds easy, but it was such a hard decision for me to make. I was deeply concerned about the perceptions that people would have of me. I knew that I wasn't in the right place to handle a critical incident at work. During my last shift, I thought about how badly I did not want an ERC call to happen because I knew that I wasn't ready to handle it. I felt a tremendous sense of anxiety because I knew that I was struggling. I was worried that people would see that I was not doing well. I was fearful of people knowing my reality, so I tried to hide it by taking some vacation time. I knew that I wasn't ready to protect my teammates, but I was too ashamed to admit that I needed to take a knee. I was desperately trying to resist having to admit to myself that I was struggling. I was barely sleeping at night and full of anxiety. I didn't want to see the reality of how much I was struggling. I just wanted to hope that it would go away with a little bit of time. I wasn't willing to admit that I needed to take some time away from work to take care of my mental health. Journaling experience. As I described in Chapter 1, Sanjay saw that I was struggling and invited me to try journaling. My first reaction was not interested. This sounded too weird for me. However, I had a huge amount of respect for Sanjay. I looked up to him as a mentor because he'd earned my trust. So I gave it a try. Sometimes we need to trust the people we are close with, even when we can't trust ourselves. We also need to be able to recognize that we can often have an initial reaction of denial and objections when someone can see our struggles and when they offer us help. As sad as these events that I've explained were, I can talk about them now without being overwhelmed by emotions. The events will always be sad because they are sad, but the emotions no longer control me in a way they used to. I have processed the emotional pain away from the memories so that I no longer feel overwhelmed by them. These emails were my truth in the moment. I never expected anyone other than Sanjay would read them. I wasn't even sure that I would hit send to deliver them to him, but they were all my truth. I felt like I was going crazy. I titled my first piece of writing, Thoughts from a Broken Mind, because that's how I felt, broken and hopeless. I was lucky I had people who cared about me and who could see that I was struggling. I was lucky that I already had enough trust with them that I was willing to get help. Many people aren't so lucky. So here is some of my truth that I share with you. My hope is that you will remember some of these lessons so that when something similar happens to you, you can have hope that you can get through it. Someone else has got through this, and you can come out the other side better and stronger too. March 24th, 2016. Here's the email I sent. Hey bro, first off, if me telling you about some of what's going on in my life is a burden for you, feel free to either leave it for a while or just not read it. Second, and I know this goes without saying, but all this stays between us for now. I'm not at all suicidal, so there's no reason to bring other people into it. Please don't forward to anyone else or share with anyone. I also worry about what it would mean if other people knew everything going on in my head and my life. I went to see a psychologist on Monday. I've tried going before, but I didn't find that it helped. I've lowered my expectations so that they're a lot more realistic this time. Hopefully that helps. I was referred to this guy by someone who told me that he's been diagnosed with PTSD and that this guy helped him. I know we talk about not diagnosing anything from R2MR, but he told me that I have PTSD. I told him that I'm 100% not ready to accept that or handle that. If my options are to see him and acknowledge it and deal with it or pretend I never went to see him, I will 100% never go back. I am absolutely worried about what that will mean for my career, but more so, my life, how I'm treated, and my own outlook on myself. I did my own research and thinking about things when my symptoms were really bad a few years ago. I absolutely believe that I had PTSD back then, but just wanted to deal with it myself. And I think I did that. On March 27th, Sanjay responded, and his message included, "The big SWAT guy isn't supposed to break down. Or is he?" Lessons learned. Reducing stigma. As the reaction from the union representatives showed, institutional stigma around mental health in policing is real and has been a feature of policing culture. I felt that stigma when I experienced some mental health challenges. I believe that my policing career would be hurt if I acknowledged and sought treatment for PTSD. Mental health challenges exist, but officers have worked within a culture that historically discouraged them from seeking treatment. In 2022, I completed a research project interviewing police officers while completing my master's degree in the presence of mental health stigma was the most important finding of the research. It is perpetuated from a hurtful cultural stereotype that cops shouldn't have emotions and that they shouldn't show emotions. We cannot expect ourselves to stop being human. It is a harmful stereotype that we need to leave in the past. In a 2019 peer-reviewed journal article, psychology researcher Elizabeth Velasquez and Maria Hernandez write, "It is crucial for law enforcement officers to feel they are supported and encouraged to seek psychological help without having to endure any additional shame. The idea is a work in progress because cultures do not transition immediately, which is why early intervention and education is so imperative. I'm trying to accelerate that cultural change, both to reduce mental health stigma and to increase education by writing this book about my experience." Personally, I was fortunate that I received great support from friends and coworkers. However, I continued to carry much of the stigma in my own head. It was the messages I was telling myself. I had a self-limiting belief that I couldn't do anything because I was diagnosed with PTSD. When you hide your pain, you are likely to amplify it by judging yourself for even feeling that pain. When you talk with people you trust, you can gain strength from the love, support, and acceptance you receive from others. I'm specifically saying, show your world with people who have earned your trust. That's where you can be vulnerable. They're the ones who can help you let go of your pain, just like you would for them. The consensus among psychologists is that having a good support network is one of the best protective factors for PTSD. Purpose. Add meaning to suffering. I have resolved a lot of the trauma I experienced. There are things I couldn't even think about. Now I'm able to talk about them openly, even while public speaking, without becoming consumed by emotion. Honestly, I don't even feel like crying at all. This has given me the chance to use the suffering I experienced to help other people, which has helped me to find a purpose and a meaning in that suffering. I get a lot of happiness from helping and serving other people, which is probably part of what attracted me to a career in policing. Being able to take pain that I experienced and use it to help others gives that pain a purpose, and pain with a purpose is much easier to bear. We all want to feel a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. Writing this book gave me a great sense of purpose because I believe that we can still and will save many lives by helping people to manage their own mental health. I expect that improved police officer mental health will decrease the number of police officers who die by suicide. I have spoken with many police officers who have found ways to use their painful experiences to help others, and, therefore, to give their pain meaning. It can be as a peer, supervisor, trainer, with your family, or out in the community. It can be something as simple as having more empathy for people you interact with. I don't feel ashamed. The best way for me to reduce the stigma around mental health is to give a voice to my experiences so that I can share them with others. Even when I was off work on stress leave, I used to say to myself, I don't have anything to be ashamed of because I haven't done anything wrong. I still believe that. But there's a reason I had to keep repeating it to myself. For a long time, I didn't believe it. I could understand it on a logical level, but I didn't truly believe it at a gut level. I was judging myself more harshly than anyone else. I had worse things to say to myself than anyone else. That is self-stigma. Later in this book, I'll refer to police officers who were involved in shootings that are described in psychologist Dr. Chuck Rylant's book, Shots Fired, The Psychology Behind Officer-Involved Shootings. These officers mentioned all kinds of trauma they have experienced throughout their careers and how their experiences affected them. Several of them described moments of holding their gun and contemplating dying by suicide. Many had relationship problems, night terrors, and conflict in their personal lives. These officers are courageous. They're heroes for using their vulnerability to help others. Their individual experiences represent patterns of similar experiences that countless other police officers have experienced for decades. They are willing to speak up about their experiences. They're willing to break the stigma around mental health. Breaking this stigma becomes easier for future cops to do, as more cops before them have been vulnerable enough to share their experiences. As Professor Brene Brown says, vulnerability is not a weakness, it is a strength, and it is often closely aligned with courage. And courage is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to overcome fear. Insecurities expressed as stigma. A part of what we see and describe as stigma comes from deep insecurities within the officers who are perpetuating the stigma. They feel emotions that are similar to what I describe, but they are insecure that someone will find out about it, so they need to put other people down for having emotions. They are trying to comply with the notions of police culture passed on to them. Feelings are weakness. Suck it up. Don't be weak. They can also feel a sense of superiority over people who don't conform with their belief that we must deny our emotions. It's bullshit. It needs to stop. Don't let someone else push their issues onto you. If you see someone perpetuating that stigma, then speak up about it so that we can continue to reduce the stigma together. Journaling science. On April 20th, I sent an email to Sanjay that said, "Thanks for the call yesterday. It was nice to hear from you. I'm still trying to work on my stuff. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is reading books that can teach me things. Right now, I'm focused on a book called The Happiness Advantage. I really like this book, and I'd recommend it. However, I just hit a section that really caught my eye because it relates to this and what we've been talking about. I'll quote something from the book, and I think it will make some more sense. Experiments show that when people are primed to feel high levels of distress, the quickest to recover are those who can identify how they are feeling and put those feelings into words. Brain scans show verbal information almost immediately diminishes the power of these negative emotions, improving well-being and enhancing decision-making skills. So whether you do it by writing down feelings in a journal or talking to a trusted coworker or confidant, verbalizing the stress and helplessness you are feeling is the first step toward regaining control." Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is a psychiatrist, author, and past president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress. In his book, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, He says writing is one of the most effective methods to access your innermost feelings. He explained that if we speak with someone, especially if we don't have enough trust, we have a social editor who changes what we say. However, writing is different. He states that experiments around the world have continually found that writing about upsetting events improves mental and physical health. Retired police officer and host of the 1033 podcast, Nathan Kapler, explains the power of writing as there's a link between the hand and the mind with writing. It's literally like throwing stuff out of the body and right into the garbage. Daniel Amen, psychiatrist and author of Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, agrees with the benefits of writing down your feelings and describes himself as a big fan of it. Professor of psychology Jordan Peterson, author of 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, says journaling has powerful benefits of resolving previous emotional pain. We need to normalize journaling as it brings tremendous benefits. We need to tell the stories of people who have used it and found it to be incredibly successful in resolving traumatic memories. The benefits of journaling is widely accepted among the world's top psychologists. Trust and connection. In her book, Dare to Lead, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts, Brene Brown describes trust as a marble jar. She said that when we have positive interactions with people, we build trust. We put marbles into the jar, and when our trust gets broken, we can dump a whole bunch of marbles out in a hurry. I tried journaling because I had so much trust in Sanjay. For some police officers, they hit a point where they become suicidal and they can't even trust their own thoughts. You need to know who you can trust. You need to know this now before you experience traumatic symptoms. Who do you know that you could be sure would have your best interest at heart? These are the people we need to turn to most when we go through our hardest times. Dr. van der Kolk explains that studies showed that having a good support network constitutes the single most powerful protection against becoming traumatized. Recovery from trauma involves reconnecting with our fellow human beings. You need to know who you can trust, and you need to lean on those connections to help you through your challenging times, especially if you hit a point where you aren't able to trust your own thoughts. The expert panel on police officer deaths by suicide is a report from the Ontario Coroner's Office after 9 police suicides occurred within the province of Ontario, Canada, in 2018. It provides recommendations after investigating the deaths of 9 police officers. The first recommendation is titled Normalizing Mental Health Challenges. This recommendation, given urgent priority, states that mental health stigma needs to be reduced. For this to happen, the report says mental health must come out of the shadows. This is why I have written this book. This is why I'm sharing what I wanted to hide in the shadows. As I reread the first lines of my journal, it struck me that I was in a hurry to say that nobody else could ever read what I was writing to my brother. However, after hearing from so many other officers with similar experiences, I have learned that normalizing our experiences by talking about them openly would help future officers immensely. It will help to reduce the stigma that they will feel, and it will also help to recognize the patterns that previous officers have experienced so that they can get help and get better more quickly. So instead of hiding my darkest moments, I'm bringing them out of the shadow for everyone to see. This normalizes the challenges that I went through and that so many of us go through by decreasing the stigma around mental health. This can normalize helpful strategies to overcome these hardships by sharing the lessons that took me so many years to learn. Some people won't understand. On April 27th, I sent an email to Sanjay that said, "Some stuff happened today that I'd like to talk about. I went to the doctor to get prescription sleep pills. I told him I was on stress leave from work and about my trouble sleeping, and that I wanted a specific type of sleeping pill. He started telling me how his clinic was in trouble for overprescribing them and wouldn't prescribe them for me. I told him that I have PTSD and that I have issues sleeping, and that I've been told to get these by my psychologist. He told me that you don't have PTSD and was very dismissive and talked down to me about it. He started telling me about some miners who were trapped in a mine and how 80% of them said that they didn't have PTSD. I could feel my anger building. I can't remember being that mad, ever. No exaggeration either. I wanted to punch him in the face so badly. Part of me, the nice part, thought I should just not say anything and leave. But fuck that shit. So I told him what I thought, or at least some of it. You're a GP, not a psychologist, and you know almost nothing about me. It's really offensive for me to have you tell me that I don't have this, when my psychologist is the one trying to convince me that I do. I told the psychologist on day one that I wasn't ready to admit it or accept it. So don't pretend like I'm just looking for attention or something stupid. I didn't start out by saying I have PTSD. I started by telling you my sleep symptoms. He then told me it was my fault for not telling him sooner. Why the fuck would I need to tell him that? Why would it matter? You don't need PTSD to be prescribed fucking sleeping pills. He tried to debate with me, and I found it really offensive and just interrupted him to say, we're not having this talk, and you can prescribe this for me or not. But then I'm leaving, and I'm not willing to talk about this with you anymore. Some people will not understand your experience just like this. They may have positional authority as a licensed doctor, but they don't know what they're talking about. Other times it will be a coworker, a supervisor, or even a family member. We can't control the thoughts and reactions of others, but we can set healthy boundaries. Continuing to debate my mental health with this doctor was not going to help me. He was going to say stupid things that would interfere with the work that I was doing on myself. His positional authority would set me back and make me question my own thoughts. I recognized that he was an idiot and I needed to get out of the situation. I also recognized that I had the right to stand up for myself. I don't care if you have the title of being a doctor. You still have a duty to treat your patients with care and respect. The number one rule of medicine is to do no harm. The longer I spoke with him, the more chance that he had to harm my thoughts. In hindsight, I'm happy I stood up for myself. But it won't be easy when someone who should support you doesn't get it. Spreading stigma, cynicism plus stigma. Have you guys heard who's off-duty sad? Here's what happens when an officer says this in front of everyone on the team. One person just shamed their coworker in front of their peers. It usually takes one of two forms. First, the absent coworker is implied to be weak for not being able to handle stress like the rest of us. I've been to the same calls that they went to. The absent coworker is being made an outsider from the group. Or it's implied they're faking their psychological injury and abusing the system to enjoy a vacation. In that case, the comment is often followed with something like, I saw them at the golf course the other day. They're probably just faking it. When this shaming happens, it is totally unfair to the person who's off. But it's worse than just that. It's also unfair to the people who are present because it spreads and reinforces stigma to them. The voice in the back of their head says, I don't want people to think and talk about me like that. I'm never going to put myself in that position. This is exactly how stigma spreads. Culture is carried within people, and stigma is carried within culture. These types of moments are exactly what we need to understand and to prevent. It's also crucial to understand the mixture of high stigma and high cynicism in policing. I'll elaborate more on cynicism in Chapter 5, but trust me, policing has a big problem with cynicism. The high degree of cynicism in policing can lead officers to see everything in a negative view. The officers are constantly dealing with the worst in society, so they perceive the world in a way where they see the worst everywhere, even when it isn't real. When you combine a high level of mental health stigma with a high degree of cynicism, officers can perceive their peer to be faking their psychological injury. Many officers already feel severely stressed and overworked. Part of what they don't say out loud is, I don't have room to do my own work, and I don't have room to take any of their calls. Resourcing shortages are an organizational problem, but they can build resentment in officers who are left feeling like they always need to do more with less. My final thoughts. Reducing mental health stigma is crucial both for police officers and in society. I was surprised when many police officers who participated in the research for my master's degree said that they wanted to be forced to speak to a psychologist on a recurring basis. Anyone who knows police officers knows that they don't want to be forced to do anything. These officers can already go for free confidential counseling. What they were asking for was for their organization to destigmatize mental health. They wanted mental health to be normalized so that they felt more comfortable accessing it. Stigma reduction is the most important thing that we can do to impact police officer mental health. It's what has been called for by experts, researchers, and surviving family members of suicide. It's something that we can all contribute to doing. First off, we can change how we think about mental health. Secondly, we can change how we talk about mental health. Finally, we can change how we support people with their mental health. I'm willing to do everything that I can to accelerate our progress with stigma reduction. It started by changing my own thoughts, my own mental models. I spent years challenging my own self-stigma. I don't judge myself anymore for having feelings, nor for being human. And you can change your mental model too. Then it progressed to sharing my stigma reduction in small groups. I saw how powerful it was to share my feelings in small groups as an instructor and a peer support member. Now I have dedicated 4 years of my life to creating this book. In it, I'm sharing with you many of the hardest moments of my life. If someone wants to judge me as weak or shame me, honestly, I don't care. That's their dysfunctional mental model, not my problem for being human. I'm taking many of the scariest skeletons out of my closet so that you can see them in me. One day this might help you to face yours. I'll share my stories of my failures or my guilt and my pain, of the shame that I felt, because they can help to destigmatize your experiences for you. Key takeaways. 1. Stigma is carried within the policing organizational culture and is passed on from the more experienced officers to newer officers. This stigma becomes internalized by officers who judge themselves and become worried that others will also judge them harshly. Stigma prevents police officers from seeking professional help, even when they need it. We need to recognize it and continue to shape police culture to reduce and remove the stigma around mental health. Expressing your feelings through writing, i.e. journaling, is highly recommended by expert psychologists because it is an effective method for managing emotional pain.